Well, I before I get into the main message, I want to kind of give a little bit of the journey of bringing this message forth. Woke up Sunday morning, and we had our family devotional time, which was just a Bible reading. We sit around the table, we pray together, and the reading for the day was in Matthew 26. And when I woke up earlier that morning, I went to go pray myself before I went to go pray with my family. And I just had this sense like, I feel like things are getting a little too comfortable. I have a sense like people are getting too comfortable with the way things are in society. There's the whole idea that if you take a frog and drop it into boiling hot or very cold water, it's going to jump right out. But if you put it in lukewarm water and slowly boil it, or put it in a freezer, it'll just sit there and metabolize with the temperature and then either freeze or boil to death, because it gets comfortable in the setting that it's in. Now, Yeshua said, be cold or be hot. He said, just don't be in between. Don't be lukewarm. Because there's a slow roast and a slow conditioning that happens when you're not in either place. You look at the thermostat on the wall, and the thermostat sets the temperature for the building, right? You know you're lukewarm if you go into an environment and you allow the environment to set the temperature for your spirituality. God has called us, His people, to be the thermostat, to set the temperature. We are supposed to be the ones who set the tone and the temperature in the world, to give the world its conscience of what is right and what is wrong. I know that we don't like those terms nowadays because we're in postmodernism, so we question whether or not, we question what is right and wrong, and then we're entering into postmodernism, which even says there's no such thing as even truth. Getting off on another point there. But I was in a place of meditating before the Lord, not transcendental meditation, don't get me wrong, but meditating on the Word. And sometimes when I'll be in prayer, I don't have a great sense of like anything. It's almost sometimes it's a real work. Prayer can be sometimes a real labor. It can be a real work. It's not always enjoyable and But I went to go pray with my family, and that was when God hit me with something in Matthew 26, because I came across the verse in verse 41 that says, He says, keep watching and praying, and something woke up in my spirit in the sense that the enemy would love to lull God's people to sleep through a slow conditioning to where we get the sense that, okay, this is the new normal, let's just go with it. Now, I know there are a lot of prophetic voices. Some of them are genuine. Some of them are people who are immature and they're beginning to step into the prophetic gifting. Some of them are just flat out false. So we're not despising prophecies, but we are testing prophecy. And I had to step away from everything this week. I had to step away from all news. I had to step away from all the political stuff, because I was like, you know what? You can begin to get so immersed in it that you actually become blind to the bigger picture. So I had to step back and I say, I just got to ask this one question. Irregardless of who winds up president or whoever is saying who's going to be president and who I may like or whatever, I just got to step back and ask the question, is our nation under judgment? Because irregardless of who winds up president, it may matter a great deal And I recall not just recent prophecies, but prophecies from 50, 60 years ago, where some of the prophetic voices and men and women of God saw things over the nation. And I had a sense of, okay, if we are in a position where the nation is undergoing judgment, then what does that mean for us? Now, I want to let me say this. When I'm bringing a message to you, I'm bringing it as a father. I don't go and study a message out to present it to you. I go and will pray or will seek the Lord because I want to know how to lead my family. I want to know how to raise my children to pursue God no matter what. So that's the context for me bringing the message forth. It's not necessarily that I have to feed the flock, but it's that my family is my personal flock. And then I will see often the heart of the Father for the rest of his people. So I'm not trying to study as some great scholar, as some great type of voice for anything other than just, being grounded in Messiah. And how do I disciple my family in the things of God? You following me? All right? I don't have a bestseller on the New York Times list, nothing like that. I just want to make sure my children and my children's children have a legacy left to them that they will hold their ground in the faith. So, regardless of whether we are in a position of national judgment or if we are in a position where this whole thing is something that has been strategized by the enemy, I'm not giving a hardline definition, and I think we should be careful about setting some of those hardline definitions ourselves, because there have been many people who have been proven wrong on different ends of the spectrum in this past season, right? A lot of people have been proven wrong both ways. That doesn't mean that we are senseless or indecisive. We may go to a job and we may not like that job. How many of you like your job? Okay, you've got a few people who like your job. I'm not going to ask the rest of you what you think of your job. But sometimes you have a job you don't like, but you really need that job. And maybe there's political officials we really don't like, but we actually need them at this point in time. It might be the other way around. One thing is for sure, there's a lot of corruption in our society. There's a lot of corruption in politics. There's a lot of corruption in our nation. And as I was meditating on this the other day, the Lord reminded me, corrupt things are things that are dead. If it's corrupt, if it's corroding, if there's decay, it's because it's dead. I saw a cute little thing the other day. It was a guy, and he was in prison. It was a little cartoon. He was in prison, and he was trying so hard to reach for a loaf of bread that was outside of his prison bars. And as he was so drastically focused on the piece of bread that was outside of his prison bars, he failed to realize that the key that would unlock him out of the prison was on the other side of opposite the bread of the prison bars. So we can have the sense of, okay, are we just reaching for a piece of bread that's going to satisfy us behind our prison? Or are we searching for the key that's going to let us out? I'm not trying to stir up any kind of debate or get us along the lines of a particular vein of thought in the natural, because the heart behind this is for us not to get comfortable either way. That our solution is God, even though we may have some unfavorable things in our midst that we have to deal with. If you have your Bibles or electronic devices, you could turn to Matthew 26. Chapter 26, verse 36 through 41. We're going to begin here in verse 36. And we just said the Lord's Prayer, which is very apt for the moment. If you're there, can you say Amen? All right. Then Yeshua comes with them to a place called Gethsemane. Gat Shemanim. It's the title of today's message. Gat Shemanim. I didn't intend this to be a series, but this is going to be 3 parts. It's called Watch and Pray. Then Yeshua comes with them to a place called Gat Shemanim. He tells the disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And he took along Peter and Zavdai, his 2 sons, James and John. And he began to be sorrowful and troubled. So he leaves the other 8 at a further distance, and he takes Peter, James, and John with him as he's going to go pray. Remember, they had just observed the Passover meal, probably a few hours earlier, an hour or 2 earlier. Then he tells them, my soul is deeply grieved, even to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little farther, he fell face down and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Then he comes to the disciples and finds them sleeping. And he tells Peter, why me? Why are you going to call me out? These guys are asleep too. And he tells Peter, what? I like that. We put that in some of the translations. What? Because it's in the Greek tense that infers, this what question? What? So you couldn't keep watch with me for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying so that you won't enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He says, keep watching. There was a scholar by the names of Franz Delitzsch. Some of you may have heard of him. He was a scholar and one of the leaders that really impacted Jewish ministry in the 1800s. And he wrote a version of the Gospels in early Talmudic Hebrew, in Mishnaic Hebrew, which is the Hebrew that the Talmud and the Mishnah were written in. And he translates keep watching and praying as shikdu v'hitpalelu, which means be ready, be steadfast and praying. And he uses the same term that means in Hebrew to be ready. God told Jeremiah, what do you see, Jeremiah? And he says, I see an almond tree ready to blossom. And he says, even so my word is ready to be fulfilled. And so he's using the same term there, shaked, to be ready. Be ready. Keep watching and praying. I want to ask you a question. Are you ready? Ready for what? I don't know. Are you ready? It's precisely for the unknown that we should be ready for. What I believe this message is meant to do is to equip you for the hour that you need to be prepared to endure, to stay awake, to stay at attention, on alert. The disciples are in a place called Gat Shemanim, the oil press. It is a garden on Har HaZayit, the Mount of Olives. They had been on the Mount of Olives all night, and over the past few days, if you read Scripture several chapters back, he had been speaking a lot of things from the Mount of Olives. If we look at everything in Matthew chapter 5, the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 6, where the Lord's Prayer is found, Matthew chapter 7, if we look at everything that has come previous to what Yeshua has taught the disciples, all of it would essentially mean nothing if they failed at this point. Because this is the real deal. This is the real almost test. And yet they did fail. They did fall asleep. Everything in the 3.5 years that they walked and that they ate and they ministered with him, it would have been nothing if this one lesson, this one reality had not been learned in Messiah's darkest hour. If they don't learn this, everything else could be lost. Why? Because Messiah had to prevail in this place of the pressing. He had to prevail in prayer. And listen, we talk a lot about, oh, he won the battle at the tree. He won the battle at the cross. Listen, it was finished at the cross. He won the battle in prayer there in the garden. That was where the battle was won. That was where the surrender of his will took place in the fullest of what he needed it to be, so that he would be prepared for the arduous tortures that were awaiting him. That was necessary for him to fulfill his messianic office. And in a certain sense, it's actually good the disciples failed in that hour, because it actually taught them the importance of what he was trying to teach them in that hour, to keep watch and to keep praying. This would be a lesson that they would remember the rest of their lives. His most dire hour, and they fell asleep. How many of God's people are falling asleep in a most dire hour as we're in? Giving up hope, giving up, well, you know what? He said he was going to come and we're going, we got to go through this or whatever. Yeshua pleaded with the Father 3 times, surrendered every time. And in this process, he was depending on them to stay awake and to pray, to be in agreement with him, and they all fell asleep. They all fell asleep. You ever been in prayer with someone? You ever had a prayer need, and you said, I got to pray with a friend or something like that, and you start praying, and it's almost like they're kind of asleep while you're praying? Anybody ever, it's almost like they don't quite get your need? Anybody ever had a situation like that? Yeah? It's kind of like they don't get your need. They're just kind of there like, okay, I'm here to agree and stuff. Why? Because they don't have the same vision. They don't have the same burden you do. And over and over in the chapters that came before this, we're continually told they didn't understand what he was saying. They didn't know what he was up to. They didn't know what he kept telling them, the Son of Man will be handed over. And they didn't get it. They didn't quite see it. And you can't blame them in some regards, because we wouldn't have done any better. They weren't expecting a Messiah like that for the most part. So why didn't they have that vision? They weren't in the same vein of belief and understanding he was. And so sometimes people, when we have a dire need or a dire emergency, sometimes people might be 5 steps behind us in prayer. When we're like, God, I really need healing, or a loved one really needs healing, and they're kind of like, oh, yeah, we're just going to agree with you. They don't quite have that unction. This morning we were praying desperately for a young woman who's about to make a decision on whether or not to abort her child. Is that how I understood? Where'd she go? She left? What'd she do? She's not here. Oh, she's probably downstairs. Okay. All right. Oh, hi, downstairs. Yeah. We were praying for this baby's life, pleading for this baby's life. This is why some people understand the reality of the hour at hand in this time, and some people are coasting like everything's normal. Everything's going to go back to normal. If I just get comfortable, if I could just, I hope things go back to normal. I do. I think about the reality of, what if there's another lockdown? What do I do as a leader? Do I pull a John MacArthur? Do I stand and do I resist? Is this virus real? Yes, it's real. Or do I accept the fact that there's a social conditioning and paradigm change in the world that is going out through all of the social collective consciousness of society? and that this might actually be something that is setting the tone just to move forward with. And I was thinking, you know what? I'm tired of going to the store wearing a mask. I'm going to take the thing off and bam, you know what? Take your mask. I'm tired of wearing it. I don't care. And then, yeah, you know, internally I have some of those feelings like a lot of people. Yeah. I don't want to be comfortable. You know what? I don't think that there's some things that are really not right about this whole situation. But I don't know all the facts. We don't have all the facts. All I know is that I need to keep watching and I need to keep praying. That's all I know. All I know is that I need to be ready, and I need to be ready for the Lord. When we look back at Matthew 24, Yeshua gave a parable. We'll be in Matthew 24 next week. The parable of 10 virgins. He gave a parable of 10 virgins. 5 fell asleep. Well, actually, all of them fell asleep. But 5 had oil and 5 didn't. And I find it interesting that the disciples, they so quickly forgot this parable that they just heard him speak to them about a few days before. Because here they are in the garden, they're being told to stay awake, and they've just heard this parable about these, you know, virgins who have fallen asleep. We look at Peter, the one who is always steadfast and loyal. He's rebuked because he falls asleep. And we find that he is ready along a certain sort of line of thought to engage with the situation at hand, but he's ready for the wrong thing. Peter was ready enough to react to the soldiers and the mob coming to arrest Yeshua that he takes a sword and he cuts a guy's head, not a guy's head, but a guy's ear off. And Yeshua heals the guy. But he wasn't ready. He was ready to confront the mobocracy and the multitude, but he wasn't ready for 2 girls to come and say, hey, weren't you with Yeshua of Nazareth? No, I don't know the man. He was ready for the big thing, but he wasn't ready for the little question. As I was praying this morning, this really provoked me. This bothered me. I said, God, I'm preaching to myself. What happens if I prepare and make my spirit and make my soul ready, and then I get to the one test that I choke on? Imagine training for the Olympics or training for a test, and you go through all the preparation, you go through all the training, you go through everything that's necessary, you follow every guideline, and then you get to the moment that it's going to all count for the most, but then you choke. Imagine training for the Olympics and the gun goes off, and instead of taking off, you trip on the first step. I'm preaching to myself here. He was ready, but he was ready for the wrong thing. If you look right before verse 36, Yeshua told Peter, he said, you're going to deny me 3 times. 3 times. So right before they went into the garden, he was told he was going to deny Messiah. And what did Peter do? He denied denial. What's that acronym that I heard the Celebrate Recovery guys say? It was like, he denied denial. What was it? Didn't even know
I was lying.
Didn't even know I was lying. Didn't even know I was lying. He denied denial. He was in denial. And Yeshua rebukes him, what? He rebukes him 3 times. 3 times to stay awake and to pray. It's interesting. He denies Yeshua 3 times. Yeshua told him 3 times, stay awake and pray. So here's the first thing. A denial to pray might increase the possibility to betray. How many people give up on their prayer lives before they give up on Yeshua himself? Maybe they don't say, I deny. Maybe it's just a lifestyle. I guarantee you that people who do not pray, they're not living according to the Word. They're not as stringent. Why? Because prayer is where God is dealing with the heart. Prayer is where we are judging ourselves. Lehitpalel. It means to judge self. We're looking into the Word. We're going and we're, okay, you know what? What does the Torah say? Okay, what does Yeshua say? He said, oh, you know, anyone who looks at a woman as if to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. Oh, well, man, that's a high standard. Okay, we're going to pray about this. Oh, there's a billboard I saw the other day on the way to work or whatever. Oh, it kind of took me just for 5 seconds or whatever. Oh, Lord, are you showing me something? Lots of people praying, lots of people playing instead of praying. When we look at Peter falling asleep, that simple act of failing to pray, it went before the act of betrayal. Well, what about the other disciples? They didn't betray Yeshua. Oh no, they were all scattered. They were all scattered. They all, you know, you had one guy who followed from behind, but they were all scattered. He said, pray lest you enter into temptation. They didn't consciously deny praying. They just drifted off to sleep. They just got comfortable. They just got comfortable. You see, the darkness, it has a natural way to lull us to sleep. That's what darkness, that's why the sun goes down. Your body is on a rhythm to where when it's dark, oh, you know what, it's time to sleep. It's a natural thing. Sometimes it's a fight to stay awake, let alone engage in focused prayer. That was me this morning. Man, I woke up and I was so tired. I had this thing with leaves, the raking leaves. You know, I never had to rake so many leaves before in my life. I spent like 4 hours raking leaves yesterday after I was praying. And then I got done. I went, made some breakfast and stuff, came back in, and it was about 2 o'clock. I told my wife, I said, I'm going to lay down for 30 minutes. I'm exhausted. You know, my leg is 100%, and so I'd been off of it for a whole week, just about, and I was exhausted because I hadn't been working out at all. And then a knock at the door. There's somebody outside, knock at the door. All right, let me get out there. This little old sweet man from the town hall. He says, I've been going up and down the past 3 blocks knocking on people's doors. I said, okay, well, what's going on? He says, your pile of leaves are in the street. Oh yeah, well yeah, I mean, that's what I was told. I was told just put them in the street. Well, you can't put them in the street because people are calling the town hall and complaining, so you've got to move all the leaves back onto your grass. Oy vey, what? Oh, the violence. So I said, okay, I'm not from around here. You know, I should have had my Texas mezuzah up on the door, you know, my license plate from Texas, because I'm not from around here, you know. I went back out and, you know, moved all those leaves back, and then, all right. So I was kind of sluggish in prayer this morning. It was hard to focus. It was hard to engage. I know what it's like. Thank God He's merciful. We came in today. We had an awesome time of prayer before the service began. One of the things that happened here with them in the garden is they weren't taking some of His words to heart. He was telling them to stay away, and they were falling asleep. There are many believers who are not taking Messiah's words to heart. And they will fall asleep. They will fall asleep spiritually. There was a man, and he was in the audience, and the preacher was preaching, and the man, he said, he just stood up in the middle of the message, and the preacher was like, okay, what's going on here? And so he says, are you okay, son? And the man says, I need to get saved. I need to receive Yeshua. I'm not living right. I need to get saved. I don't want to wind up in hell. And the preacher says, oh, hell, oh, don't worry about that. There's no such thing as hell. prayer, a lack of prayer in our lives can set the stage for apostasy. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians that day will not come upon the world unless a great falling away happens first. A great apostasy. People will not take the words of Messiah to heart, and they will fall asleep spiritually to awaken to the hour of his coming, and they won't have any oil in their lamps. I can't imagine anybody standing before Messiah when he returns, and standing before Messiah, and he says, hey, you know what? You took me a little too seriously. You should have relaxed. Right? I can't imagine just, hey, you know what, Aharon, you took me a little too seriously, and people thought, they thought you were a little too extreme. You shouldn't have taken me too seriously. I'm not going to censor God. I'm not going to censor his word. So you leave here, go damned to destruction? I walked out the door one day. This is back in Texas about some time before we came. I was throwing the trash out. You know, my wife said, can you take the trash out? I said, yeah, I'm going to take the trash out. And it was before I was going to work. I took the trash out, and the Lord said this to me. He said, do you know why you don't hear messages about hell anymore? No? Why? He said, the same reason you don't hear about fairies and leprechauns. My people don't believe in it. And I got in the car to go to work, and what a strange moment to speak to me while I'm throwing out the garbage. And then the Lord reminded me, the Valley of Gehenom. Gehenna, the word for hell. It was a place where the garbage was thrown. It was a place where the garbage burned. This whole thing is taking place at the Mount of Olives. If you look throughout the Mount of Olives discourse, Matthew 24, 26, Mark chapter 13, those passages where he's talking about the end of days and what will happen and what will befall believers in the end of days, the continual instruction on the Mount of Olives is this: watch and pray. If there are only two things that you know and that you remember for the things that are coming upon the world, if there are only two things that you can keep in your spirit in order to endure what the darkness is that is coming upon the world, it would be this: watch and pray. Those are the two things. As the democracy rises, pressure becomes more intense in the olive press, in the oil press. The more intense, the more continued instruction in our time right before Messiah returns is to continue to watch and pray, to be ready. It says in Nehemiah 4 verse 9 that when Nehemiah was building the wall at night, that they set people in prayer divisions and they watched and they prayed. The great instruction for our time is to watch and pray. And I guarantee you that Peter remembered this lesson the rest of his life. You know why? Because there are 3 times in his first epistle that he writes, be sober and vigilant. 1 Peter 1:13, therefore gird up the loins. That's a euphemism for be ready. Gird up the loins of your mind. Be sober. And rest your hope fully on the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Yeshua the Messiah. He said in chapter 4, verse 7 of 1 Peter, but the end of all things is at hand. He said that almost 2,000 years ago. He said that almost 2,000 years ago. So are we in the last of the last days? Huh? Yeah. Therefore gird up the loins, but the end of all things is at hand. Therefore be serious, be sober, and watchful in your prayers. You think that he remembered what he learned in the garden? I think so. He then says in chapter 5, verse 8 of 1 Peter, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. A little bit about the Greek terminology there for sober. In chapter 1, verse 13, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober. That word there has to do with state of being. The state of being. In the second verse, chapter 4, verse 7, the end of all things is at hand, therefore be serious, be sober, watchful in your prayers. The word there has to do with being self-controlled in one's right mind. These are two Greek terms, sophroneo and napho. And so both of them have to do, they are directly associated with the idea of sobriety from wine, a person not under the influence, which carries with it the understanding that they are composed, they're in their right mind. Their self-control has led to remaining in a state of sound-mindedness. In other words, a person who decides to say no to the bottle or anything that might cause them to act under the influence is taking a step in terms of action to remain in a proper state of being. So one term has to do with action, the other has to do with state of being. You following? You following? One has to do with the action that one's taking to stay sober. The other has to do with the state of being being sober itself. So what steps are you taking to ensure that you will remain in the proper frame of mind and stay alert? The disciples, they missed these steps in the garden, but now, here is Peter emphasizing that taking these steps prepares us for the darkness of this age. So if there's a second point, it would be this. When you're in the right mind, your spirit is in the right place. When you're in the right mind, your spirit is in the right place. God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. People who are panicky, people who are thrown off mentally, that's what the enemy did in the garden. He psychologically threw Eve off balance. He said, hey, you know what, you'll be like God. God didn't say this, God didn't say this. And he engaged her in a dialogue to where he changed her way of thinking. It affected her spirit being. It affected everything about their lives there. God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. No matter what's on the media, no matter what's on the TV. God has not given you a spirit of fear. You need to proclaim that over yourself. You need to declare that over yourself in prayer. Sometimes I yell it. Sometimes I yell it over my wife. She's like, shh, calm down. I'm like, God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and of sound mind. You got to be aggressive sometimes in prayer. The effectual, fervent prayer of the righteous avails much. It makes power available. It doesn't mean that we're just all in some type of hype all the time spiritually. But Peter, he's doing what? He's writing out of his own experience back in the garden. He's using the same lesson, the same idea. Let me tell you this. If this pandemic, if the protests, if the riots, if all of it is nothing but a dress rehearsal for something greater that's coming, then you need to learn this lesson now. You need to snap out of it. If I got to grab you and I got to shake you and say, hey, you know what? Wake up. When you get, when my daughter, she'll wake up really early sometimes. I try to get up at 5. I don't always wake up at 5, but sometimes she'll get up and I'm like, oh man. It's really uncomfortable for someone to wake you up when you don't plan to be awoken. Right? Yeah. If we continue in escalation with the events that are going on, we need to take our heads out of the sand because now is the time to watch and pray. If you don't have a time of devotion with your family, you need to develop that now. And here's another thing. It's beautiful outside, right? You got the sunlight out. When do you need a security system? In the daytime or the night? At nighttime, right? Yeshua says, keep watching and praying. Your enemy's not going to come to you when the sun's out. He's going to come to you when darkness is upon the world. Yeshua said this. He said, watch and pray. And the term that he uses there for watch in Greek is Gregorio. It's like the name Greg. He says, be watchful. This is what Peter says. Be sober and be Gregorio. Be vigilant. Be Gregorio. Now, this is a military term. We're coming up on Hanukkah in a few weeks. One of the places where this term appears is in the book that tells the story of Hanukkah, 1 Maccabees. Let me read to you this verse in 1 Maccabees 12:27. Wherefore, so soon as the sun was down, Jonathan commanded his men to watch, to be gregorial, vigilant, and to be in arms, that all the night long they might be ready to fight. Also he set forth guards round about the host. Now, a book doesn't have to be in the Bible to be important. That doesn't mean that it's infallible. It doesn't mean that it's inerrant on the same level of Scripture. It just means that it's important as a reference for how we understand the terminology that is used in the Bible. Okay, so I'm using this verse in 1 Maccabees to illustrate how the term is used. I'm not saying that 1 Maccabees is on the same level of Scripture, okay? Right? Everybody follow me? Right? Okay. What we find is that the only way to navigate the darkness of the world is to keep our ears open to the words of Messiah that gives us light in our heart so that we can see, so that we can continue to watch and pray. Peter then says this in 2 Peter 1:19. He says, we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well to listen as a light that shines where? In a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. The only way to navigate through the darkness of this world is to keep Messiah's word. Hold on to it. And that word is the anchor for our souls. That word is the light. It's the lamp to our feet. Adonai Uri Vishei Mimelo Efchad. Lord is my light, my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Lord is the strength and stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? So when Messiah says to keep watching and praying, what he's saying is he's giving a twofold action. We're watching, we're seeing what's happening. We know these things are coming upon the world. We have that light that we're holding on to of his word. We're looking, we're seeing what we're going on, and then we do this. God, give me the bearing. Give me the strength and fortitude to be able to bear forth what I need to in this day and age. When the watchman was on the wall and he saw an army coming in the middle of the night to come and lay siege to the city or to attack the city, the watchman didn't just stay there, look at the army coming towards him and get scared. Someone had to go and communicate with the king what they saw so that the king could give them orders in how to deal with the approaching enemy. So if you are looking only at things online or the media or, pop theology on YouTube, I don't know why people get their theology from the internet. That would be like I have a heart problem. Oh, let me go look up what some random guy says on Reddit or whatever. Let me go look at what Joe Schmo on YouTube says about having a heart attack. No, you're going to go to an actual doctor. You're going to go to an actual doctor. Now you go, let me get my medicine from YouTube. What a bunch of nonsense. Keep watching, keep praying. Why don't you stand with me? It's not always easy to continue in the things of prayer. Sometimes, like I said, it can be, prayer is the work. It's the thing that you have to work through. But it's also the place where the breakthrough happens first. And if you don't know how to pray, prayer is really easy. You just talk to God. You just tell him what's on your heart. It's not a fancy thing. You don't have to be eloquent. You don't have to pray a long prayer. Nia prayed like 30 seconds and one line of prayer. More than anything, I hope this message encourages you. It doesn't make you feel like you're beat down, because there is hope. And I put this out there the other day, God is not some point on a political agenda who can be tacked on or removed. He's not a legislation that can be put into some type of written law. He's the King of Kings. And no matter who is the president of this country, he's the king of our hearts. He's the king of our lives. We all have a job that we have to go to. Some of us like it, some of us don't. But we know that our provider is really the Lord. So we have the responsibility in the natural, but we have the security in the supernatural and the divine nature of who God is. Father in heaven, we come before you this morning, and if anybody has a need for prayer, Lord, I pray that you release their hearts to come. And after the service, we will be available to pray with you. And you need to be strengthened in any way, or you need prayer in any way. Maybe some things are very difficult to assess in this time. They need to be released to the Lord. God wants to work in you. He wants to transform you. He wants to give you hope and encourage you that he is with you. So, Father, as a congregation, we have partaken of your table together. Thank you for encouraging us, stirring us to your heart and what you are saying. We know that you are going to return soon. It may not be tomorrow, maybe it would, I don't know. Lord, help us to put aside all of the things that we're trying to figure out. Help us to not be called into a place of comfort by where we forfeit the grace and also the vigilance that you want us to continue in. Help us not to give any hold to bitterness in this hour, or to anything that would discourage us to the point that we feel like we are so spiritually weary because of the things that we see. Lord, help our joy to be in you. Yivarechecha Adonai vayishmerecha. Yair Adonai b'namilecha v'yichunecha. Isa Adonai b'namilecha v'yasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and guard you. The Lord make his face shine on you, be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his face towards you and give you peace through Yeshua, the Prince of Peace, the Son of the living God. And may you be prepared to be a blessing, no matter the darkness in the world. May you be prepared to be his ambassador, a shining light of his kingdom and his character and his glory. In holiness and purity, Lord, bless your people with shalom.